Evrenin büyüklüğü insanın hayatını anlamsız mı kılıyor?
Does the size of the universe make human life meaningless?
Hello, my name is Gregg Easterbrook. I'm an American writer. I write both nonfiction books and literary fiction. I've published 12 books. My books number 13 and 14 will be out next year, and I'm hoping that they'll both come out on the same day. Let's see if that actually happens, but that's the plan right now. I also have a lifelong affiliation with Atlantic Magazine, which is the principal intellectual publication of the United States. I've been both a writer and an editor there. And I've written one book on theology, one book on science and theology. I've written cover stories for a number of publications, The Atlantic, Newsweek magazine, back when it was a bigger deal than it is today, really, and also Science magazine, the leading technical journal of the world on the science religion question. So it's a question that concerns me a lot. And I think it's a question that is far from resolved. You can find people who think that science is one and the debate is over. You can find people who think that religion is one and the debate is over. I think this debate is barely getting started. Let me tell you a little bit about about your resolve that the more the universe seems comprehensible, the more it seems pointless. This is a pretty well-known quotation from an American physicist named Steven Weinberg, who died a while back. Brilliant physicist. He's, if any of your audience follows physics, he was the leader of the team that developed what's called electroweak theory that explains the relationship between electromagnetism, which is all around us. We're using electromagnetism to do this Zoom call, and the weak force that controls radioactivity at the subatomic level. They seem to have nothing to do with each other. He showed mathematically that they do. So, a brilliant man. He also wrote a book of reflections on the question of how the universe was created. And that book ends with the sentence, the more the universe seems comprehensible, the more it seems pointless. And that sentence is often quoted. Oh, but does it really end there? There's another paragraph in that book in which Weinberg goes on to say, but even if the creation of the universe was pointless, we can give it meaning by acting in a righteous manner and loving each other. That's about the most meaningful thought that anybody can have. So if any of you in the audience who may hear Steven Weinberg, the physicist, described as someone who believes that life is pointless. No, he didn't believe that at all. What he believed is that whatever force created the universe was pointless. We live in a universe that's full of meaning, that's full of God, that's full of good, full of bad. One of our roles as human beings is to reduce the bad and increase the good, and that seems pretty meaningful to me. In fact, the book that I'm working, the nonfiction book that I'm working on now, which is about what we know about the cosmos, and I think we know hardly anything about the cosmos. I'm going to propose that we know 1% of what is possible to know about creation, and that it's very, very early in the human quest for knowledge to think that we could really be sure of anything other than that the sky is blue. And I hope that I'm 69 years old. I don't think I'll live long enough that there's an answer to how the universe was created, but it's entirely possible that people who are alive today will learn that answer. And I think that would be incredibly fascinating. Let me tell you something that seems important to me. If you know your history of astronomy, Edwin Hubble discovered the second galaxy, Andromeda, in 1924, that's slightly less than a century ago. Until 1924, all well-educated people believed that there was no other galaxy, that the one that we live in, the Milky Way, was all there was to the universe. This is what all the great minds of Abrahamic theology believed, all the great thinkers of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. They all believed that there was only the Milky Way and that it stopped at some kind of boundary, and then the universe there was nothing else. Einstein believed that when formulating the theories of relativity. And what they thought of as the Milky Way was a much smaller place than we now know it to be. Einstein once said he thought the Milky Way contained a couple of thousand stars. maybe a little bit more than that. That's what Aristotle said. That's what great thinkers have been saying for millennia. We now know that the Milky Way contains 100 to 150 billion stars. That's just our local neighborhood. A lot of them don't have planets, and how many of them have planets that are similar to Earth is one of the big unknowns. That's something that I would really like to know the answer to. And again, it's possible that people who are alive today will learn that answer. But all these great minds in both science and theology, Ernest Rutherford, Robert Maxwell, the great minds of modern science, they all thought that we lived in a place that was relatively small, and beyond it, there was nothing else. So in 1924, Edwin Hubble discovers there's a second galaxy. And this is a shocking notion to everybody, to science, to theology. Aspects of his discovery caused the Belgian priest Georges Lemaitre to go on and formulate the Big Bang theory. And he's trying to figure out that Hubble, a short time later, also discovers that second galaxy that we've since named Andromeda is moving away from us. So why is it moving away from us? Why does that happen? And Georges Lemaitre, the priest, comes up with the Big Bang idea and said, well, we're all rushing outward from some central place of creation. Lemaitre thought that central place was the divine creation, that God has used God's power to create the universe. Everything was flying outward from that point, and that the farther we looked into the universe, the more things we would see, and they would all be moving away from us. And everyone laughed and said, oh, that's so ridiculous, George. That can't possibly be true. And then it turned out to be true. Over the course of the next couple of decades, hundreds of galaxies were discovered. They were all moving away from us. There was a brilliant astronomer named Fritz Zwicky, Swiss by birth, who lived in California and taught at Caltech, and had his graduate students start counting galaxies, ones that could be seen with the instruments that were available at that time. And in the mid-60s, they released a catalog of 29,000 galaxies. Remember, this is just one generation after people thought there was only one galaxy. Now we see evidence of 29,000. And people thought this was beyond outrageous. People also thought that it should be seen as a disproof of God. They thought, well, the more science there is, the less God there is. That's how it works. More science means less God. And we'll talk about that in a minute, because I don't think it means that at all. But a lot of people reacted to the galaxy catalog in that way. So there's 29,000 galaxies. We're just completely meaningless here on Earth. Some people took the opposite view. Martin Luther King, who was alive then, said that the finding of 29,000 galaxies was what confirmed his belief in God. Excuse me, I got a sore throat. That only a really majestic force could be responsible for creation at that level. So for M.L. King, 29,000 galaxies didn't diminish his faith, it increased it. Well, we go on, the numbers have kept piling up. Right now, the current estimate is 100 billion galaxies. And the physicist Lawrence Krauss, until recently at Arizona State, a big name in speculation about the Big Bang, Lawrence Krauss estimates there are 400 billion galaxies. These numbers are so huge, they have no meaning in common sense terms. What is 400 billion galaxies? I can't imagine what 400 billion soccer balls would look like. Trying to imagine 400 billion objects the size of a galaxy full of stars, it exceeds the human power of imagination, and it really has no common sense meaning. But it does seem to be the case, unless we're really, really wrong about basic elements of astronomy. It looks like all those galaxies are there. So does this make you think that we're meaningless? It didn't make Martin Luther King think that. It made him think that if there weren't people, if there weren't thoughts, and there may be many kinds of people who are physically different from us, but if there weren't intelligent beings who are aware of their own existence, it would just be a bunch of rocks, and who cares how many rocks there are? It made the enormity of the cosmos made Martin Luther King feel important. And I got to say, it makes me feel important too. There may be right now 50 million light years from here, the equivalent of a Zoom call of a university student and an author talking about, look at this picture. It shows that there's a planet called Earth. Could anything be more outrageous? And just debating whether it makes them feel small or big. To me, it makes me feel big. An important part in understanding our search for meaning is that the enormity of the cosmos is not reflected in theology. All the Abrahamic faiths, 99% of their concepts of theology were finalized before basic facts about the universe were known. When intelligent people, and perfectly conscientious and intelligent and smart people, thought that there were only, many of them thought that the sun revolved around the earth. Well, many of them knew that that wasn't true, but they certainly didn't know that there were 100 billion galaxies. They never would have guessed that creation was that enormous. And it can make you think that, well, why would God care about any one place if the universe is that big? I can imagine a God that would care about every place, no matter how big the universe is. Anyway, we're now learning that the universe is way bigger than we thought. And we're also learning that it's not just moving away from us. That wasn't enough. It's speeding up. Discovery about 25 years ago, mainly by astronomers affiliated with Johns Hopkins University, which is in Baltimore, Maryland, and also is the team of people. It's a pretty big team at this point, managing the new space telescope that NASA just put into space beyond the orbit of the moon. They're managing it. The guy who runs that team, a man named Adam Rees, who's I think one of the revolutionary thinkers in all of science, realized, along with a lot of doctoral students working with him about 25 years ago, that the distant galaxies are not just moving away from us, they're moving faster all the time. And it looks like they've been moving faster for epochs, and they'll continue to move even faster in the future. And it makes you think two things. First is, what could possibly be powerful enough to push an entire galaxy? Because that's what seems to be happening. And the answer to that has been given the name dark energy. People kind of snicker over the name dark energy because there's a lot of bad Avengers movies that have dark energy as their theme. But dark energy seems to be a real thing. It seems actually to exist. We don't know what it is. We don't know where it comes from. It looks powerful enough to accelerate entire galaxies. And that sounds like divine power to me. Now, it may not be divine. It may be a perfectly deterministic force that arises naturally. Until we figure out what dark energy is, we won't really know. It does seem to indicate that power is being added to the observable universe from somewhere else, from a divine realm, from another dimension. Your guess is as good as the next Nobel Physics Prize winner, because nobody knows where dark energy originates. It does suggest, at the very least, that the universe will not collapse at some point in the future, which is what a lot of the great thinkers of history have assumed, but that the universe will literally be eternal. Not that it will last for a long time, that it will last forever. And in if those of you in the audience who have taken classes in thermodynamics, you know that closed systems always expire, and the universe has been conceptualized as a closed system into the last few decades. If the universe, and then it would expire at some point far in the future, long after our demise. But if the universe is not a closed system, it may never expire. And that seems pretty meaningful to me. I admit, if you and I knew the answer to the question of whether the universe is eternal or will eventually burn out and be cold and lifeless, that answer, whatever it is, would have no effect at all on our day-to-day life. Whether you've got coffee in the morning, whether your power works that day, whether you have a successful life and a good marriage, knowing the fate of the universe is not going to have any effect on that. But still, if we knew it, it would tell us a lot about whether there's likely to be long-term meaning. Have we joined a cosmic enterprise that is moving towards some goal? And I don't mean physically moving it, expanding farther up, but is there some purpose that we're supposed to seek? Obviously, this purpose would be very large and very long term, but I would like to think that there is a purpose that we're seeking. And I think as we look at the current data from astronomy, boy, it sure looks like a universe that has a purpose. I think we can imagine that a universe that didn't have a purpose would look very different from the one that we actually see. Although everyone agrees, in the same way that you cannot neither prove nor disprove the existence of God. Based on current knowledge, we can neither prove nor disprove that the universe has a purpose. And at some point, will we be able to prove or disprove purpose at some point? Maybe. I don't think it'll happen in my lifetime. If we sat around thinking, saying, well, what metrics would we use? What would we expect to be able to demonstrate scientifically if we are going to prove that there's no purpose? Or on the flip side, if we're going to prove that there is meaning to the universe, what would we have to demonstrate scientifically? I don't think we're even close to be able to devising those metrics yet, because as I said, I think we know about 1% of what there is to know. If you like astronomy and you follow just our own solar system is far less than 1/100,000th of 1% of creation. And we don't know how many planets there are in our solar system. That's how little we know. We're still arguing about how many planets there are right close to us. Imagine what's going on far away. Some of you may have seen the pictures from the new space telescope that were shown to President Biden in the White House 3 months ago. Spectacular pictures of nebulae and other distant objects. And when you looked at those pictures, and it wasn't just that they were bright, shiny lights. When you looked at the scope of those pictures, you thought, wow, I'm seeing the whole of creation in a picture. Here's the number. Those pictures showed 0.00003 of the cosmos. That's how much more there is that we don't even have a picture of yet. So there is a lot to learn. I have two other points to make. One is that in intellectual affairs, especially in the United States and Western Europe, I confess to being ignorant of the intellectual climate in Anatolia. But in the United States and Western Europe, it's generally assumed that if you're smart and well-educated, you should be an atheist. Only those village rubes believe that God exists. Because the background of this issue and debates over Darwin's teaching of Darwinian evolution in public schools and other issues, the background of the issue was that science and religion was seen as at each other's throats. And the assumption was anything that's good for science is bad for religion. Anything that's good for religion is bad for science. So you have to choose which side you're on. You either believe that science is always right and religion is always wrong, or you believe that religion is always right and science is always wrong. And of course, intelligent people believe that science is always right and religion is always wrong. You can tell from the way I'm saying those words that I think that's a very silly way to think about the issue. But that's the very silly way to think about the issue that dominates, for example, the Ivy League here in the United States. Harvard, Yale, Princeton. I've spoken in all those places, and the first question I always get is, you're obviously intelligent. How can you believe there's actually a God? And it's a political question, not a theological question. I see that questions like that through the lens of politics. And I point out that most people who think in that way, and I love to blame the Ivy League for things. I would blame Harvard, Yale, and Princeton mainly, but we can blame Stanford and Duke too, just to share the blame around. Who think that way, think that either science is right and religion is wrong, or religion is right and science is wrong. And I always say there are several other possibilities. One is that both of them are wrong. I mean, what if it turns out that science and religion are both wrong, and we know literally nothing at all, except we know how to fly airplanes and make cell phones, but about the larger cosmos, we know literally nothing. That's a possibility. The other possibility is that science is right and religion is right, that they're both right, that the disputes between them have to do with wording and exactly how you express ideas, that the fundamental thinking that science tells us why the universe operates the way it does, religion tells us what this means. Both those things can be true at once. And I think that when I say that meaning is making a comeback, I think that's the direction that we're going in. Now, like I said, I'm aware of my own mortality. I don't think I will live long enough to see this dispute resolved. I think we can't be sure if this dispute will ever be resolved. But I do think it's moving in a much more interesting direction than you would guess from the intellectual output of a lot of Western institutions, let's just put it that way. And finally, I'll give you one more proposition. So to simplify, a debate. Let's say that there are two possibilities. One is that the universe was created by a creator God who exists today. And in that case, clearly the universe has meaning. Our challenge is to figure out what is that meaning. Now, let's say the universe, there is no creator God. The universe was generated entirely by naturalistic forces. In that case, there's still meaning. Just like Steve Weinberg said, the meaning is what we make by behaving righteously. Sorry for my cold. Behaving righteously and looking after each other, we can make meaning. In either case, the universe is meaningful. And I think the more people who understand that, the better off everybody will be. And that's what I wanted to say.